What would Bach do? The question of how to really play Bach properly is a huge one that has been plaguing pianists for hundreds of years. Whether or not we should even be playing Bach's music on the contemporary piano is already quite controversial.
Some people feel that people shouldn't play Bach on the piano. Other people think that playing Bach on the piano should be as closely an imitation to playing it on a harpsichord. Some people play with absolutely total abandon, enjoying the instrument with no thought of any kind of historical performance practice.
Because of this ambiguity, the range of musicality in interpretations of Bach is huge. It could sound as different as this and this. There's one pianist out there who I know is thinking a lot about how to bring Bach into the contemporary age and how to play his music on the piano. That's Evan Shinners, sometimes known as WTF Bach, who is currently embarking on a project to record all of Bach's piano music and who has given some great lessons for tonebase on some of Bach's most iconic keyboard music. I'm Robert Fleitz from Tonebase, and today we're going to turn it over to Evan to give us a little bit of insight into one of Bach's most famous and perhaps infamous pieces, the Prelude in C major.
You know, this piece has been so played in the history of music and on so many different instruments that one might be tempted to think of this music as the way that someone has heard it on a particular CD or in a movie or something like that. But what I'm going to tell you today is mostly how we can look at the music in terms that someone would have understood it in 1722, the year that it was written. So I'm going to try and keep things from a historically informed perspective. But that's the wonderful thing about this music, is you don't need to play it historically correctly because the architecture of it is so perfect that you can sort of play it on whatever instrument, in whatever tonality, in whatever tempo. You can even play it backwards and it still sounds beautiful because it's just so wonderfully sound interiorly.
Evan is going to provide a lot of helpful information on how to tackle this piece. And I definitely suggest that you stick around because some of these ideas might be a little bit off the wall. If you're curious to learn more about Bach's music, there's tons of information on Tonebase Premium, which is the platform that makes videos like this possible. Also, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share the video with someone who you think might find it interesting. It helps us out so much, and it helps us continue to bring high quality content on piano and piano performance to your screens. So without further ado, let's get Bach to business.
That whole idea of a composer writing something and expressing himself didn't really exist in Bach's time. Bach wouldn't sit down and pen his inner thoughts. Most of his music had a very, very specific purpose. So what is the purpose of this Prelude number 1? Well, from the title Prelude, we know that it is a prelude to something. Well, a prelude to what? Well, a prelude to a fugue, because in the Baroque era, the fugue was the high art. People would test out their organs, their harpsichords or whatever, warm up their fingers for the purpose of improvising a fugue. So we know that much. And it's the first prelude in a work known as the Well-Tempered Clavier. But not only the well-tempered clavier, as Bach calls it, he says the well-tempered clavier, or preludes and fugues through all tones and semitones. And I'll show you the front piece of this work. Here you could see Bach's handwriting, actually the cover piece of the well-tempered clavier. And over here, it's sort of printed out exactly what he says. He says the well-tempered clavier, or preludes and fugues through all the tones and the semitones, those that have the major third, and also those that have the minor third. So it's not enough for Bach to say there are preludes and fugues in every key. He has to define exactly what that means. Through every tone and every semitone. Those keys with the major third, as well as those keys with the minor third. We might envision this very first prelude in the well-tempered clavier as not so much a warming up, a prelude for our fingers, but a prelude for our ears, because this, after all, is a treatise on tonality, on how to play in every single key. And not only every key, but the keys with the thirds that he mentioned. So we could still further see this as an exercise in warming up our ears and listening to the thirds in each of these chords. We can begin to understand this prelude as something that we might be checking the tuning of our instrument, because in this day, we would have to tune our own instrument. So with all of this in mind, now we can approach this work in a tempo that's sort of like listening to the tunings of each chord. We're playing in about that tempo because if we played it any slower, it's like listening a little too closely to the tunings. It's becoming a little self-indulgent. It's like a violin player, tuning and really listening to that. That's not what they're doing. They're checking the tuning. And we're also not going to play it like this, because that's simply too fast to hear the resonance of each chord. And we're listening to the thirds in it. So we have major thirds in this first chord, and minor thirds in the second chord, and minor thirds in the third chord, but it's a major chord, and major thirds in this chord, but it's a minor chord. And so this entire prelude starts to become different chords. Here's a different one. And now that we're really listening to the chords, that might shape our expression. This first chord here, that was a major seventh chord, could receive some expression, but not super self-indulgent expression, just very humble, straightforward expression. So I'm trying to keep everything more or less connected because I'm not using the pedal because there simply were no pedals on the instruments that Bach wrote this music for. If I were to play the pedal, I suppose I would pedal on every harmony, or even every chord. But pedal with your ears, don't pedal theoretically. Let's get on to a little bit of the practical aspect of how you would start to practice this prelude. Well, it's an exercise in chords, and I think that you have to sit fairly relaxed and fairly straight and keep everything as relaxed as possible. You're just listening to the tunings of the chords. So from the very first, make sure that everything is just flowing out of you without inhibition. And if you get to a chord that's maybe difficult to reach or something, like maybe something like this, depending on the size or the shape of your hand, just take your time in getting to the chord, because an adjustment of the hand can be very expressive if you just take your time to do it. There's no rush in this music. The tempo can more or less be very flexible. You keep an even sound by relaxing your hand and sort of letting your hand almost rotate like the spokes of a bicycle wheel over the pavement. Very relaxed and even. And if for some reason one of your fingers is sticking out, like my thumb here, don't use the thumb. In fact, this prelude is really how your hand best fits these chords. So if for some reason you play 5, 4, 3, 4, 5, if that feels the best for your hand, then play it. This is all about being relaxed and just evenly rotating and really listening to the sound and the quality of each chord. Your hand has a natural structure to it that can support its own weight. And I think the key to staying both relaxed and structured in your hand at the same time is just by allowing that natural shape of the hand to sort of dictate the way you play. This is kind of more or less how my hands fall when they're relaxed. And therefore, when I'm playing the piano, I keep that shape as if the piano were shaped to be in your own hands. It's also important not to take so much ritardando. Only an amateur, I think, would play like this. But I think that sort of liberty would be inconceivable for Bach, who might have only slowed down just a teeny bit. After all, the point is to go on to the fugue.
Thanks for joining us today. If you like what you saw today, be sure to check out Tonebase Premium. They're the platform that makes videos like this possible. There, you can watch all of Evan's lessons on Bach, as well as lessons on Bach from pianists such as Magdalena Stern-Bajewska, Nicolas Namoradze, and Anne-Marie McDermott, among others, as well as lessons on some of the theoretical aspects of Bach's music. Also, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And leave us a comment below. What other pieces by Bach would you like to see content on? And what other composers would you like to hear about? I'm Robert Fleitz from Tonebase. Thanks for joining us today, and I'll see you next time. Actually, this outfit is a really important part of interpreting Bach for me because it helps me feel like what it was like to play with those frilly sleeves that probably he had back in the day.